Hello, everyone. This is Dark Timelines, and you're watching What If Deku Was a Villain?
Chapter 26 Grief and Sorrow. The death of Eri was a devastating blow to Deku. Her loss was more than just a tactical setback. It was a personal tragedy that pierced through the hardened exterior of Wraith, the fearsome leader of the PLF. He felt an insatiable need for answers, to find out how she was killed and who was responsible. Driven by this burning need for vengeance, he called a meeting with the Paranormal Liberation Front and the Vanguard Action Squad, notably absent of Dabi and Twice. The room was filled with tension as Deku's eyes, dark with rage and sorrow, scanned the faces of his comrades. They brainstormed ideas, dissected clues, and discussed possible leads for Eri's killer. All for One, sensing an opportunity to manipulate Deku in his vulnerable state, subtly suggested that the heroes were to blame. He played on Deku's grief, feeding into his anger and resentment toward those who had opposed them. The weight of his sorrow, combined with All for One's manipulation, began to blur Deku's judgment. The world outside was already in chaos, and now, Deku's inner turmoil threatened to unleash even more destruction. Blinded by his grief, Deku directed his rage outward, believing the heroes were responsible for Eri's death. His actions grew increasingly erratic, and his thirst for vengeance began to consume him, driving him to make rash decisions that risked the very foundation of the PLF. It was at this critical moment that Stain, the hero killer, decided to intervene. He had seen the shift in Wraith's goals and knew that Deku was being led astray. Confronting Wraith in a secluded part of the headquarters, Stain spoke bluntly, cutting through the fog of grief clouding Deku's mind. "You're losing yourself, Wraith, blinded by rage just like any other hero you've despised." "Think with a clear head," Stain urged, his voice sharp and unwavering. "Ask yourself, how could the heroes breach this place? It was fortified, guarded. They couldn't have gotten in without someone on the inside." Wraith, still seething, paused. The weight of Stain's words began to penetrate his grief. He had been so consumed by his sorrow and rage that he had not considered the possibility of an internal betrayal. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. Stain was right. The base had been infiltrated, but it had to have been someone with intimate knowledge of their defenses, someone who could get close enough to Eri and Twice without raising suspicion. As his mind cleared, Wraith's thoughts sharpened with clarity. He replayed the events in his head, and the truth began to reveal itself. The heroes wouldn't have had the means to infiltrate the PLF headquarters undetected. It had to be someone with their trust, someone powerful enough to take down Twice, one of their strongest members. His eyes narrowed, his fists clenched. He finally understood who the real culprit was. "All for One," he whispered, his voice low and filled with a cold, calculated rage. It was him. It could only have been him. Now, with a renewed sense of purpose and a desire for justice, Deku began to plot his next move. He would not be manipulated any longer. All for One would pay for what he had done. For Eri, for Twice, and for everyone who had been caught in the crossfire of his twisted ambitions. Wraith was ready to face his enemy, no longer blinded by grief, but fueled by a focused determination to end the tyranny of All for One once and for all. Chapter 27, The Revolution. One had controlled him for far too long, and Eri's death was the final straw. Wraith had had enough. He gathered the members of the Vanguard Action Squad and Redestro, his most trusted subordinates. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with a newfound resolve. "We're leaving the PLF," he declared. The room fell silent, the shock evident on their faces. Redestro, unable to contain his surprise, demanded an explanation. Wraith laid out his conclusions, revealing the betrayal and manipulation of All for One. He spoke with clarity and conviction, detailing how Eri's death had opened his eyes to the truth. The Vanguard Action Squad and Redestro listened intently, understanding the gravity of the situation. As the reality sank in, they nodded in agreement. The trust in Wraith's leadership was stronger than ever. They knew what had to be done. A few days later, as the world was still reeling from the devastating defeat at Deka City, an unexpected broadcast interrupted all communications. Septic, a master hacker aligned with Wraith, had taken over every screen. The world watched in stunned silence as the center of the broadcast showed Wraith, standing tall with the Vanguard Action Squad behind him, along with Kurogiri and Redestro and his men. The tension was palpable as everyone held their breath, waiting to hear what he would say. Wraith began his speech, his voice steady and unwavering. He recounted the events of the past weeks, the battle between heroes and villains, the chaos that ensued, and the tragic death of Eri, the child who had become a symbol of hope and innocence. Gasps rippled through the viewers, shock and confusion spread like wildfire. In the PLF headquarters, All For One watched the broadcast, his paranoia growing. He could see his carefully laid plans unraveling before his eyes. Then, Wraith did something no one expected. He removed his mask. For the first time, the world saw Deku's face. There was a collective gasp from heroes, villains, the PLF members, the Vanguard Action Squad, and Redestro. "My name is Izuku Midoriya," he announced, his voice calm but filled with a powerful intensity. "And I am quirkless." The world stood still. Another shockwave of disbelief spread through everyone watching. The rumors were true. The child who had taken down Overhaul, who had led the PLF to victory, was quirkless. Redestro was particularly stunned. A quirkless kid had single-handedly dismantled his entire empire. The weight of this revelation crushed the spirit of many who watched, plunging them into a deep despair. All For One clenched his fists in frustration. He knew now that Deku had figured out the truth, that he was the one who had killed Eri. This was Deku's declaration of war. "I am a product of what society has made," Deku continued, his voice growing stronger. He recounted the events that had led him to this moment, the injustices and pain he had endured. "Now, I will give society what it has given me: pain." His eyes narrowed, his expression hardened. No longer will just the heroes be the targets. Everyone who perpetuates this corrupt system will face our wrath. The broadcast cut to a series of scenes showing famous heroes, villains, and high-ranking officials kneeling before him. The entire world watched, horrified, as Deku ordered their execution. One by one, they were eliminated. Their deaths broadcast live to a global audience. "We are the revolutionary. We are the revolutionary," his voice echoing with a chilling finality as the executions continued behind him. The world had never seen such a bold declaration of defiance and intent, and with that, the revolution had truly begun. Chapter 28, The War Within. The emergence of the revolutionary shook the world to its core. The Paranormal Liberation Front, PLF, members, once fiercely loyal to All For One, began to shift their allegiance to Deku's new cause. All For One could only watch as his followers deserted him, knowing that if he tried to tighten his grip, he would lose more support to Deku. He was caught in a bind, pushed too hard, and he would lose everything to this charismatic young leader who had now positioned himself as the savior of a new world order. Countries around the globe were in panic mode. The return of the old Wraith, no longer a puppet of All For One, instilled fear in leaders worldwide. Deku's declaration of war wasn't just words, it was a promise of action. Crime rates dropped dramatically as even the most hardened criminals realized there was no place to hide. It didn't matter if Deku was quirkless. He had already proven that he could systematically eliminate his targets, and now, with the support of a growing faction, his reach seemed limitless. The phrase, "Neither in hell nor heaven shall his target find refuge," began to echo in the minds of the public, a grim reminder that society as a whole was now in his crosshairs. But amidst the chaos and despair that gripped most of the population, a spark of hope ignited within a small segment of society, the quirkless. Deku's actions had shattered the belief that the quirkless were inherently weak. He had shown them a new path, one where their lack of powers did not equate to powerlessness. This revelation lit a fire in the hearts of the quirkless community, who began to rally to his cause. They saw Deku as a symbol of their struggle, a testament that even those without quirks could rise and fight back. With newfound conviction, they joined the revolutionary in droves, bolstering its ranks. Deku further destabilized All For One's grip by revealing some of his most guarded secrets to the world. He exposed the existence of the Nomu, horrifying, powerful, mindless creatures created through twisted experimentation. He unveiled the dark secrets hidden within Jaku Hospital, where these abominations were born. The revelations were a massive blow to All For One, stripping him of allies and resources. One by one, his supporters fell away, swayed by the promise of redemption and a chance to align with a cause that seemed increasingly unstoppable. The old battle lines between heroes and villains blurred as more defected to the revolutionary. Unlike the old Wraith, Deku's leadership took a different approach. He did not demand blind loyalty or forceful allegiance. Instead, he offered a simple choice: surrender and answer for your crimes, or he would ensure justice himself. Those who chose to come forward were given a chance to make amends, their cooperation seen as a step towards a better future. But for those who refused, Deku made it clear that their reckoning was near. He was no longer willing to tolerate corruption, abuse, or tyranny, be it from heroes or villains. The message was clear: stand down or be brought down. As Deku's influence grew, so did the tension between the old order represented by All for One and the new wave led by the revolutionary. The world stood on the brink of a new era, but what that era would look like was still uncertain. The only certainty was that it would be born from the crucible of war, a war that was no longer just between heroes and villains, but a war within the very soul of society itself. Chapter 29. The Final Battle. All for One was beaten. His empire had crumbled, and the heroes, though skeptical of Deku's methods, couldn't deny the results he had achieved. Deku had become the symbol of change. His extreme tactics had proven effective in dismantling the old order. Yet, a small faction within the remnants of All for One's forces still sought relief from Deku's perceived tyranny. Sensing an opportunity, All for One rallied this faction, a mere shadow of his once mighty empire, now in ruins, but still dangerous enough to pose a threat. The stage was set for the final battle between All for One and Deku. Aware of his own limitations, Deku knew he couldn't defeat All for One in a one-on-one confrontation. He was a strategist, always thinking several steps ahead. He reached out to the heroes, specifically All Might, and shared with them all the secrets he had uncovered about All for One. Weeks turned into months as All for One moved through the shadows trying to regain his footing, but he couldn't hide forever. Eventually, the moment came when All for One and Deku stood face to face. "I made you who you are," All for One said calmly, his voice dripping with disdain. "And you dare attack me?" "You didn't make me who I am," Deku retorted. "You targeted me, gave me Shigaraki as a stepping stone, but I was always more than what you tried to shape me into. I was only held back by you. Now, no longer." As Deku spoke, a portal opened behind him. All Might, Eraserhead, Endeavor, and several other heroes stepped through. "I knew you weren't trustworthy," Deku continued, his voice steady, "so I kept Eraserhead in reserve, knowing this day would come." A portal opened beneath Deku, and he disappeared, leaving the heroes to face All for One. For a brief moment, All for One's composed demeanor cracked, revealing a hint of anger. "Since then, huh?" he thought, realizing that Deku might have been planning this confrontation from the very beginning. The battle began in earnest. All Might, with the support of Eraserhead's quirk nullification, led the charge against All for One. The other heroes provided backup, exploiting every advantage they could against the villain's formidable arsenal of quirks. Despite his power, All for One found himself overwhelmed. The combined might of the heroes was too much, and with Eraserhead neutralizing his quirks, his defeat was inevitable. In the end, All for One was subdued, captured, and placed in cuffs. He wasn't killed on the spot. The heroes had decided he would be sent to Tartarus, the high-security prison. But as he was being transported, the convoy was intercepted, not by All for One's supporters, but by Deku and the Vanguard Action Squad. The squad moved swiftly, subduing the transport guards without taking any lives. Deku approached the vehicle where All for One was confined. Opening the door, he faced the man who had manipulated and used him for so long. "Come to free me?" All for One asked sarcastically, a smug grin on his face. Deku removed his mask, his expression cold and resolute. "Why did you kill Eri?" he demanded. "I wonder why," All for One replied, his tone mocking, taunting Deku with his indifference. With a swift, clean motion, Deku ended All for One's life, a single, decisive slash. "This one's for you, Eri," he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet, mournful determination. He turned away, leaving the scene as his squad followed, the silence heavy with the finality of his actions. The reign of All for One was over, and a new era shaped by Deku's vision of justice was about to begin. Chapter 30. Epilogue. All for One was dead. His remaining forces either surrendered or were eliminated. The revolution, led by Deku, had fundamentally transformed society, Crime rates plummeted to an all-time low, with most offenses reduced to petty crimes. For those who dared to incite mass chaos, Deku and his forces acted swiftly and decisively, ensuring such events never happened again. The UA students, after years of hardship and battle, eventually graduated and took their places as heroes in this new world order. Each carried the scars of their experiences, but also the hope of a better future. They faced a changed world, a world where the lines between heroism and vigilantism had blurred, yet where the ideals of justice, in their own unconventional way, persisted. Deku had become the symbol of change. His name inspired both fear and admiration. While his record of killings and ruthless tactics could not be denied, so too was his undeniable role in reshaping society. He had dismantled an oppressive status quo and replaced it with a new, if controversial, order. His actions sparked endless debates and discussions, both within the halls of power and among ordinary citizens. Was he a hero or a tyrant, a savior or a villain? To some, he was a necessary force for reform. To others, a reminder of the dangers of absolute power. As society slowly adapted to the changes brought by his revolution, one thing was clear: the world would never be the same again. Deku's legacy, shaped by grief, vengeance, and a twisted sense of justice, had left an indelible mark on history. As the story of his rise and fall came to a close, the world held its breath, wondering what new chapters the future would bring. Thank you all for joining me on this dark and thrilling journey into an alternate world where Deku embraced a darker path. We've explored the complexities of his choices, the moral dilemmas he faced, and the consequences that rippled through every character's life. It has been an unforgettable ride filled with unexpected twists and profound moments. As we close the final chapter of this tale, remember that every story has more than one side, and every hero or villain has their reasons. If you enjoyed this series, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe for more alternate storylines and theories. Let me know in the comments what if scenario you'd like to see next. Thanks for all your support, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, stay curious, keep imagining what if, and take care. Goodbye for now.